March 6, 1944. A single P-51 Mustang slices through the cold European sky at nearly 400 miles per hour. 14 Luftwaffe fighters close in from every direction. The American pilot is 22 years old. He has been in combat for exactly 9 days. In the next 3 minutes, he will do something that will force fighter pilots everywhere to reconsider what is possible in aerial combat. The air war over Europe in early 1944 is not just a conflict. It is a mathematics problem written in blood. American bomber formations cross the skies of the Third Reich in enormous waves, sometimes 500 aircraft at a time. Each B-17 Flying Fortress carries a crew of 10 men. Thousands of lives hang in the balance every time the engines start. The numbers terrify the planners. On certain missions, 1 out of every 4 bombers never returns. At that rate, the probability of a crew surviving 25 missions is almost non-existent. The cause of the losses is painfully simple: range. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt can escort the bombers for part of the journey. But sooner or later the fuel gauges fall toward empty. The Thunderbolts must turn for home. The bombers continue alone. And the Germans know exactly when that moment comes. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs wait in the gaps like patient predators. They watch the American escorts peel away and then strike the bombers in the silence that follows. Engineers scramble for solutions. Drop tanks. Auxiliary fuel cells. Removing guns and armor to save weight. Nothing solves the problem. The bombers need a fighter capable of flying all the way to Berlin and back. For months, such an aircraft simply does not exist. Then North American aviation unveils something new: the P-51 Mustang. It carries a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, one of the most powerful piston engines ever built, and a laminar flow wing designed to slice through the air with remarkable efficiency. On paper, the Mustang can escort bombers all the way into the heart of Germany. But paper and combat are not the same thing. Early pilots give the aircraft darker names: Widowmaker, Death Trap, a coffin with wings. Their complaints are precise. The canopy creates dangerous blind spots where entire quadrants of sky disappear. In a dogfight, that can mean death. The fuel system is unreliable at altitude. Tanks sometimes refuse to feed properly. The engine sputters, the propeller windmills uselessly, and gravity begins its slow claim. Even landing can be lethal. The Mustang's landing gear has a reputation for collapsing on rough airfields. More than one pilot survives enemy fighters only to cartwheel down a runway in sparks and shredded aluminum. But despite the problems, the range is undeniable. So the Mustangs deploy. Through the winter of 1943, American squadrons across England begin converting from Thunderbolts to the sleek new fighter. The pilots complain constantly. The P-47 was rugged. Its massive radial engine could absorb punishment and keep running. The Mustang feels different. Lighter, faster, less forgiving. One of the skeptical new Mustang pilots is a quiet farm boy from Iowa named Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson. Johnson arrives in England in February 1944. His logbook shows 200 hours of flight time. Exactly 0 of those hours involve someone trying to kill him. His squadron commander assigns him a simple role: wingman. Stay close to the leader. Watch carefully. Learn. And above all, do nothing heroic. East Anglia greets him with its usual winter weather. Low clouds crawl across the airfields. Cold rain drifts sideways through the wind. Fog rolls over the runways like a living thing. Ground crews work with numb hands, checking ammunition belts, tightening fuel lines, inspecting engines that must perform perfectly thousands of feet above enemy territory. Johnson spends his first week flying training sorties. Formation practice. Gunnery runs against towed targets. Emergency procedures. The Mustang handles differently than anything he flew in America. The controls are lighter, more responsive. The airplane wants to run. Holding formation feels like trying to restrain a racing greyhound. On the evening of March 5th, the squadron receives orders for a maximum range escort mission. The target is a ball-bearing factory deep inside Germany, a critical component of the Nazi war industry. The bombers will be in the air for hours. The fighters will fly farther than any American fighters have yet flown in the European war. Johnson's flight leader gives him a quiet briefing the night before. Stick close. Conserve fuel. If something happens to me, turn west immediately and go home. He pauses. New pilots who try to be heroes don't last a week. Johnson nods. He understands. The mission launches before dawn. Engines roar to life in the darkness. Blue exhaust flames flicker beneath the wings. One by one, the Mustangs roll down the runway and lift into the gray morning sky. Johnson's hand rests on the throttle. The Merlin engine vibrates through the entire airframe. He can feel the power in his chest. They climb through clouds and break into sunlight at 15,000 feet. The bombers are already there. Massive combat boxes of B-17 stretch for miles across the sky, their contrails scratching white lines across the blue like chalk on slate. The formation turns east. Germany lies beyond the horizon. For 2 hours, the mission proceeds quietly. Then the radios explode with warnings. Bandits high north. The bomber gunners fire first. Streams of tracer rounds arc across the sky like glowing wires. German fighters dive through the formation, firing, rolling away, climbing back into the sun before the escorts can react. Johnson's flight banks sharply. His leader calls the maneuver over the radio. Johnson follows, scanning the sky, trying to track 6 threats at once. A Focke-Wulf 190 flashes past his canopy, so close he can see the German pilot turn his head. Then it vanishes. The sky erupts into chaos. Dogfights spread across 20 miles of airspace. Johnson loses sight of his leader inside a cloud bank. He calls over the radio. No answer. Procedure is clear. If you lose your formation, turn west and go home. Johnson checks his fuel and begins the long return flight toward England. 10 minutes later, he sees them. 14 German fighters circling a crippled B-17. 2 of the bomber's engines burn. Smoke trails behind it like a dark ribbon. It has fallen out of formation. It is alone. The German fighters attack methodically. One dives, fires, pulls away. Another follows. Then another. They know the bomber cannot escape. Johnson glances at his fuel gauge. Half full. Procedure says, go home. Logic says, go home. Mathematics says 1 P-51 Mustang cannot fight 14 enemy fighters and survive. Robert Johnson pushes the throttle forward and dives. Robert Johnson's training in the Army Air Forces continued for months after he enlisted. More hours. More aircraft. He flew at 6 Texans, practiced advanced formation flying, gunnery, aerobatics, navigation. Each phase pushed the young pilot further from the quiet farm fields of Iowa and deeper into the machinery of war. Johnson proved competent at everything. He was not flashy, not the best stick in his class, but he was steady, disciplined, reliable, the kind of pilot instructors trusted. In the summer of 1943, he received his commission as a second lieutenant. By then the war had spread across half the world. North Africa had fallen. Sicily had fallen. Italy was bleeding under Allied attack. And over Germany, the strategic air war was expanding rapidly. The demand for fighter pilots was bottomless. Johnson shipped to England in February 1944, joining the 357th Fighter Group stationed at RAF Leiston in eastern England. The 357th flew the new P-51 Mustang. The group itself was barely a few weeks into combat operations. Everyone was still learning the aircraft, learning the tactics, learning the enemy. His squadron mates came from every corner of the United States. Farm boys from the Midwest. City kids from Brooklyn and Chicago. A former crop duster from Texas. A college student from Massachusetts who liked to quote Hemingway whenever the officers weren't listening. Different backgrounds. Different personalities. But they shared one crucial similarity. None of them had seen combat. The few veterans who briefed the newcomers had. And they spoke with blunt honesty. Fighter combat over Germany was nothing like the training films. There was no graceful choreography, no elegant turning battles stretching across blue skies. Real dogfights collapsed into chaos within seconds. You won't see the fighter that kills you, one veteran told them. You'll see the one you're chasing. The one behind you will see only your 6 o'clock. If a pilot survived his first 5 missions, his chances improved. But most pilots never reached mission number 5. Johnson listened carefully. He wrote notes. He asked questions. The answers were practical and brutally simple. Check your 6 constantly. Never fly straight, and level for more than 10 seconds. If your engine is hit, dive for cloud cover immediately. If the aircraft catches fire, bail out. If you are too low to bail out, find a field and land. If there is no field, Aim for trees. Trees, they explained, were softer than Earth. Johnson flew his first combat mission on February 28th. Nothing happened. 8 hours in the cockpit. He escorted bombers across the channel, deep into enemy territory, watched them release their bombs, and escorted them home again. No enemy fighters appeared. He landed with barely 10 minutes of fuel remaining. When he climbed down from the cockpit, his hands trembled violently. 7 hours of tension had finally released. The next 3 missions were similar. Long, cold, silent. Hours spent scanning an empty sky, knowing that at any moment it might suddenly fill with enemy fighters. Then came March 5th, the mission to the ball-bearing factory, the separation from his flight leader, the crippled bomber surrounded by German fighters, and a decision that violated almost every rule he had been taught. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force faced a crisis created by a chain of small failures. Each failure seemed manageable on its own. Together, they threatened to collapse the entire strategic bombing campaign. Failure 1. Doctrine. American planners believed bomber formations could defend themselves. The idea was elegant. A typical combat box of 18 B-17s carried more than 150 .50 caliber machine guns. Their fields of fire overlapped, forming a protective shield. Any fighter approaching the formation would have to fly through a storm of bullets. On paper, the mathematics worked perfectly. In reality, the Luftwaffe shattered the theory. German pilots began attacking from 12 o'clock high, straight ahead of the bomber formation. Head-on passes. Closing speeds exceeded 600 miles per hour. The bombers' forward guns could not depress low enough. They could not track fast enough. German Messerschmitts blasted through the formation, firing heavy cannon shells into cockpits and fuel tanks, then diving away before the gunners could respond. The curtain of lead existed everywhere except where it was needed most. Failure 2. Range. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a magnificent fighter. Rugged, heavily armed, fast in a dive. But its large radial engine burned fuel at an astonishing rate. Even with drop tanks, the Thunderbolt could escort bombers only to the edge of Germany. Beyond that point, the bombers flew alone. The Luftwaffe knew exactly where this happened. German pilots called the region the death zone. And every day they waited there. Failure 3. Replacement. Losses were happening faster than crews could be trained. In October 1943 alone, the 8th Air Force lost more than 200 bombers. Each bomber carried 10 trained men. Replacing them required months of training, navigation, gunnery, formation flying, high-altitude procedures. The training pipeline stretched across the Atlantic. But the losses were immediate. By December 1943, the numbers became terrifying. At current loss rates, planners estimated the 8th Air Force would cease to exist as an effective combat force within 6 months. Either the losses decreased, or the future invasion of Europe would begin without strategic air power. Something had to change. Engineers tried improving the P-47 Thunderbolt. More fuel capacity, less armament to save weight. Test flights showed only small improvements. The Thunderbolt had reached the limits of its design. Physics refused to bend any further. Some suggested the P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine fighter with impressive range. But the P-38 struggled in the brutal cold at altitude. Turbo superchargers froze. Cockpit heating barely functioned. Pilots returned from missions with frostbite. Some lost fingers. The P-38 was not the solution. That left one aircraft, the P-51 Mustang. North American Aviation had originally designed the Mustang in 1940 for Britain. The first versions used an Allison engine, which performed well at low altitude but struggled above 15,000 feet. The Royal Air Force used those early Mustangs mostly for ground attack and reconnaissance. Then someone proposed a radical idea. Replace the Allison engine with a Rolls-Royce Merlin. The Merlin already powered Spitfires and Lancasters. It performed brilliantly at altitude thanks to its powerful supercharger. Packard was already building Merlin engines in the United States. The supply existed. The question was whether the engine would work inside the Mustang airframe. North American tested the combination in late 1942. The results stunned everyone. The Merlin-powered Mustang could cruise at 400 miles per hour. It could climb to 42,000 feet. Its laminar flow wing gave it extraordinary aerodynamic efficiency. With internal fuel and 2 drop tanks, The aircraft could fly to Berlin and back. No other Allied fighter could do that. The Army Air Forces ordered Mustangs in massive numbers. But the aircraft still had flaws. The fuel system was complicated, 6 internal tanks that had to be managed carefully. Switch tanks at the wrong moment, and the engine could starve. The canopy created dangerous blind spots. Pilots complained they could not see threats approaching from behind and above. And the landing gear was narrow. On rough airfields, Mustangs sometimes collapsed during landing. More than one pilot survived combat only to flip his aircraft on the runway. Early combat reports were mixed. The 354th Fighter Group flew the first Mustang missions in December 1943. They praised the speed and range. But they also reported losses. Mustangs shot down. Mustangs lost to mechanical failures. Mustangs that simply vanished. No radio call. No parachute. Just gone. Some pilots requested transfers back to P-47 Thunderbolts. The Air Forces denied the requests. The numbers were undeniable. The Mustang was the only aircraft capable of protecting bombers over the deepest parts of Germany. Pilots would simply have to learn to master it. The alternative was watching bomber crews die in the death zone. So the Mustangs kept flying. By March 1944, 3 American fighter groups had converted to P-51s. The 357th Fighter Group was the newest of them all, barely operational, still learning. Their early missions were essentially combat training, learning fuel management, learning how to fight the aircraft, learning what it could and could not do. Robert Johnson's squadron had flown exactly 6 combat missions. On the 7th, he found himself alone. His flight leader had vanished inside a cloud bank during the chaotic engagement. Johnson climbed, searched, called over the radio. No response. Procedure was clear. Separated pilots were dead pilots. Turn west. Go home. But then he saw the bomber. A B-17 Flying Fortress, trailing smoke, 2 engines dead, falling behind the formation. 14 Luftwaffe fighters circled it. They attacked in rotation, methodical, efficient. The bomber's gunners fired desperately. Tracers streamed outward in glowing arcs. But the attackers came from too many directions. Too many angles. The B-17 was dying slowly. Johnson glanced at his fuel gauge. Half tanks. Enough to reach England. Not enough for a long battle. He looked again at the bomber. 10 men inside. Some of them probably wounded. All of them watching German fighters line up to kill them. Knowing no help was coming. Johnson did the arithmetic. 1 Mustang versus 14 German fighters. The calculation was simple. The result was suicide. He thought about the bomber crew. Then he stopped thinking. Johnson pushed the nose down. His Mustang dropped from 28,000 feet to 15,000 feet in less than 40 seconds. The aircraft accelerated past 400 knots, and he plunged straight toward the German fighters. The Mustang shakes as it dives. The airframe shudders under the stress. Wind howls across the canopy so hard it becomes a constant scream. Johnson's vision narrows into a tunnel. Just the gun sight, just the target, nothing else. He hauls back on the stick. G-forces slam him into the seat. The horizon whips sideways, then steadies. The Mustang levels out 200 yards behind the nearest Focke-Wulf. The German pilot doesn't even know he's there. Johnson centers the pipper. The FW-190 swells in the sight picture until it fills the glass. He squeezes the trigger. 6 .50 caliber machine guns erupt at once. The Mustang vibrates like it's being hammered from the inside. Brass casings scatter in a glittering stream. Tracers converge into a single, brutal line. The German fighter's tail section disintegrates. The Focke-Wulf snaps left, rolls, then drops into a spinning fall gone. And now the Germans see him. 2 Messerschmitt 109s break toward Johnson immediately. Johnson yanks the Mustang hard right. The aircraft answers instantly, light, fast, unforgiving. He climbs, rolls, reverses. The 109s follow. They are skilled, experienced. They work like a pair, one high, one low, trying to bracket him, trying to force him into a mistake. Johnson does the one thing the Mustang was built to do. He extends. The P-51 speed opens the distance, yard by yard, second by second. The Germans chase. He lets them. He drags them away from the bomber. 1,000 yards. 2,000. Then Johnson snaps the Mustang around in a violent reversal. The Messerschmitts overshoot. For 3 seconds, Johnson has a shot. He takes it. His burst catches the lower 109 at the wing root. Fuel flashes into flame. The aircraft trails fire like a comet. The pilot bails out, parachute blooming white against the blue. The second 109 breaks off, dives, and disappears. Johnson checks his 6. Clear. He looks for the bomber. It is still there. Still flying. Still limping westward. Still under attack. The remaining Luftwaffe fighters have regrouped. 12 now. They no longer attack in calm rotation. They have watched what happened to their comrades. Now they are angry. 4 of them peel off and turn toward Johnson. Every instinct screams at him to run. Every briefing. Every hour of training. Every rule that keeps rookies alive. You are outnumbered 6-1. You are alone. You are low on fuel. He turns into them anyway. The 4 German fighters spread out in a classic pattern, multiple angles, multiple threats. The tactic is simple. Force him to choose one target while the others kill him. It has worked 1,000 times. Johnson doesn't choose. He flies straight at them. Full throttle. Head on. A game of chicken at nearly 600 miles per hour combined closure. The Germans fire first. Cannon shells streak past. Tracers slash through the air. Johnson holds his line as the range collapses. 500 yards. 300. 200. At 100 yards, Johnson fires. Then he rolls inverted and dives under them. The 4 German fighters scatter in surprise. One trails smoke, drifting away. Johnson doesn't watch it fall. He's already climbing, already scanning, already hunting the next threat. The bomber suddenly noses down. Its pilot has seen the opening. While the fighters are distracted, the B-17 drops into cloud cover. Smart. The cloud layer sits thick at around 8,000 feet, a gray ocean of concealment. Johnson follows the bomber down. The Germans follow too. They plunge into the cloud layer together, and the world disappears. Visibility becomes nothing but gray. Johnson flies on instruments, altimeter, airspeed, compass. He knows the bomber is close. He knows the Germans are close. He just can't see them. He breaks out beneath the clouds at 6,000 feet. And there it is. The B-17, 300 yards ahead, dragging itself west with smoke streaming from its wounded engines. Seconds later, the Germans punch out of the cloud layer too. Professionals. They do not scatter. They do not panic. They reorganize instantly. Johnson counts 8 now. 2 are damaged, smoke or coolant streaming, but the rest look clean and deadly. They have ammunition. They have fuel. They have numbers. Johnson has something else. Rage. He climbs into them again. This time they don't scatter. This time they turn into him. Head-on merge. 6 American guns versus a wall of German fire. The sky becomes a storm of tracers. Johnson's windscreen cracks. Something punches through his left wing. Fabric tears. The airframe rings like a bell. He keeps firing. A Messerschmitt detonates in midair, just explodes, a bright flash, fragments tumbling, the fireball dropping away. Johnson pulls up hard. Gray creeps into his vision. He gasps, forces a breath, clears his head. He rolls and checks 6. A Focke-Wulf is already there. Guns flashing. Johnson breaks left, but not fast enough. Rounds hammer into the fuselage behind his cockpit. Something vital is shredded. Hydraulic fluid sprays across the canopy in a misty sheet. His controls grow heavy. He glances at the gauges. Hydraulic pressure is falling, still present, but fading. Hydraulics control his flaps, his brakes, his landing gear. If the system fails completely, his return will not just be difficult. It will be fatal. He ignores it. He keeps flying. The Germans reform again. 5 left. No, 6. One climbs from below. He's lost count. They aren't leaving. They want him specifically now. He has killed their comrades. Humiliated them. One American, alone, still alive. They attack together. Johnson meets them alone. What happens next is not graceful. It is not tactical. It is survival refined into violence. He shoots one fighter at 50 yards, the burst slicing through the cockpit. The aircraft flips into a spin. Johnson pulls so hard the Mustang trembles at the edge of a stall. He kicks rudder, skids, snaps the nose around, fires again. Misses. A Messerschmitt flashes past so close Johnson sees the pilot's face. Young, terrified, then gone. His ammunition counters drop. 10 seconds of firing time. Maybe less. He has to make it count. He picks a Focke-Wulf. Waits, steadies, takes the perfect shot. The German breaks. Johnson follows, fires, hits. The enemy engine locks. The propeller freezes. The fighter glides away, descending out of the fight. Johnson squeezes the trigger again. Click. Nothing. He toggles the switches. Nothing. The guns are dry. No ammunition. The remaining German fighters don't know that. Johnson turns into them anyway. He angles his nose like he's about to fire. He holds his line like a man who still has teeth. The Germans break away, defensive, cautious. They have seen what his guns were doing, and they do not want to test it again. Johnson uses the bluff. He opens the throttle. The Mustang surges forward, pulling away into open sky. The Germans chase, half-hearted. They are low on fuel too, low on ammunition. They have already lost too many. One American is no longer worth dying for. They peel away. Johnson watches them go. His hands shake on the stick. His heart hammers like an engine. He looks down. The bomber is still there, still flying west. Johnson forms up on the B-17's wing. The waist gunner leans out and waves. Johnson lifts a hand and waves back. They fly together for nearly 20 minutes. Then the bomber crew signals again. Ahead, faint through haze, the shape of the English coast. Safety. Home. Johnson peels away and turns toward RAF Leiston, glancing at his fuel gauge. Nearly empty. Enough. Maybe. His hydraulic pressure drops to nothing. No flaps. No brakes. He radios the tower. Coming in hot. No hydraulics. The tower answers immediately. Fire crews scramble. Johnson crosses the coast at 2,000 feet and spots the airfield ahead. He lines up carefully, then reaches down and drops the landing gear manually. No indicator lights. No reassuring green lamps. Just hope. He comes in fast. Too fast. Touchdown. The wheels hold. The Mustang keeps rolling. Endless runway. No brakes. No flaps. Pure momentum. Johnson cuts the engine. Lets friction and grass do the work. The aircraft finally stops, 10 feet from a fence. He sits in the cockpit for a long moment. Breathing. Alive. Ground crew reach him first. They stare at the aircraft like it's a ghost that shouldn't exist. 43 holes punched through the skin. Wing fabric shredded. Hydraulic fluid everywhere. Windscreen cracked and crazed with spiderweb fractures. Someone asks how he made it back. Johnson doesn't answer. He climbs down. His legs wobble. He leans against the wing, closes his eyes. Another man asks the question everyone is thinking. How many did you get? Johnson shakes his head. He wasn't counting. The gun camera will tell the story. But Johnson doesn't care about the footage. He cares about the 10 men inside that bomber. They are going home. That is enough. An hour later, his squadron commander finds him and pulls him into a debrief. Johnson tells the story in plain words. The commander writes everything down, asks questions, listens carefully. When it's over, the commander sits in silence for a moment, staring at the young pilot as if reassessing reality. Then he tells him he is being recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross. Johnson shrugs. He did what had to be done. The commander tells him something else. Intelligence reports a lone P-51 engaged 14 Luftwaffe fighters over central Germany. At least 6 confirmed destroyed. 3 more probables. The rest fled. The engagement lasted 3 minutes. Robert Johnson flew 3 minutes against 14 enemy fighters and survived. He didn't just survive. He won. The commander asks the only question left. How? Johnson thinks, then gives the only answer he has. The Mustang. The aircraft they had called a coffin. The aircraft they mocked. It gave him speed when he needed speed. Turning when he needed turning. Strength when rounds tore through it. The Mustang kept flying. Kept fighting. Brought him home. Word spreads through the group, then across other groups. Not exaggerated. Not embellished. Because the gun camera proves every second. 1 pilot. 14 fighters. 3 minutes. And suddenly, nobody is laughing at the Mustang anymore. What happened over central Germany was never meant to be a demonstration. Robert Johnson did not climb into the cockpit that morning thinking he would validate an aircraft design, reshape fighter doctrine, or leave behind a piece of film that engineers would study like scripture. He didn't even know he was doing anything historic. He saw a bomber dying. He saw 10 men about to be erased. So he helped. That was all. But the gun camera footage didn't care about intentions. It recorded the truth at 16 frames per second, and when the film was developed, it changed the conversation across the 8th Air Force. Because fighter tactics in 1944 were built on assumptions inherited from earlier skies, France in 1918, Spain in 1937, Britain in 1940. Those assumptions said, a lone fighter cannot survive against concentrated numbers. Speed alone will not save you. Certain maneuvers become impossible above 300 miles per hour. Structural limits will punish pilots who try too much. Johnson's camera proved those assumptions wrong. The film showed him pulling turns at speeds that should have locked the controls, diving at rates that should have caused flutter, rolling and reversing at velocities that should have torn the aircraft apart, climbing when, by the numbers, the Mustang should have stalled and died. But it didn't. The P-51 responded. The wings didn't fold. The tail didn't depart. The controls stayed alive in his hands. When the footage reached North American aviation, engineers watched it like a crime scene replay, frame by frame, again and again. They weren't seeing a pilot show off. They were seeing their aircraft performing beyond its own published boundaries. Sustained turns that suggested 7G loads. Dives past limits with clean recoveries. Roll rates faster than test summaries claimed. Energy retention that looked almost too good to be real. The laminar flow wing was doing more than predicted. The Merlin was delivering power beyond what the charts promised. And the structure, the aircraft everybody called fragile, was holding. One engineer watched the film 3 times, then wrote a short memo that landed like a hammer. The P-51 is capable of more than we believed. Pilots are limiting themselves based on assumptions, not reality. Update the manual. The Army Air Forces agreed. In April 1944, updated guidance began moving through Mustang units. Higher approved operating speeds, harder turns, more aggressive dives. Not because pilots wanted permission, because the data now proved the airframe could take it. Johnson's 3 minutes had become evidence. But the shift went deeper than performance envelopes. Before Johnson's fight, doctrine said something simple and logical. If you are outnumbered, disengage. Run. Survive. Regroup. The mathematics made sense. 3 fighters against 10 should not fight. They should extend, escape, live to fight the next sortie. Johnson ignored that doctrine and won anyway. So his squadron commander began asking the question nobody liked to ask. Why did the Germans break off? They still had numbers. They still had position. Johnson was alone, damaged, nearly empty, and at the end, out of ammunition. So why did they leave? The answer wasn't tactical. It was psychological. They had watched 6 comrades fall in 3 minutes. They had seen a lone American refuse to behave like prey. He didn't run. He didn't fold. He turned into them again and again, as if the numbers didn't apply. It rattled them. And once doubt enters a pilot's mind, it spreads faster than bullets. Hesitation in air combat is death. So the Germans disengaged not because they had been outflown, but because they had been shaken. A new doctrine began to form in the briefing rooms. Not reckless aggression, calculated aggression. The willingness to press when logic says retreat. To turn into the threat instead of away from it. To force the enemy to react, to defend, to hesitate. Because hesitation kills. And once the Luftwaffe started hesitating, the statistics began changing. In March 1944, the 8th Air Force lost 97 bombers. In April, losses dropped to 58. In May, 34. The curve was undeniable. Something had changed. The Luftwaffe was still dangerous, still skilled, still capable of killing. But now, they were losing momentum. The P-51 was part of the reason, but only part. The other part was a shift in mindset. Escorts that stopped behaving like something that could be pushed away. Johnson's engagement was dissected across England. Pilots studied the film the way surgeons study anatomy. Frame by frame. Pause. Rewind. Watch the angles. Watch the timing. Watch the tiny decisions that kept him alive. And certain lessons emerged. Small, practical truths that no training manual had emphasized enough. One pilot noticed something first. Johnson almost never flew straight. Every few seconds he changed something. Heading, altitude, attitude. 5 degrees. 10 degrees. A shallow climb. A shallow dive. Nothing dramatic, but constant. Never predictable. It made him hard to track. Hard to aim at. The German fighters were always correcting, always adjusting, never able to settle their guns. Their sights were always chasing a target that wouldn't behave. That idea spread. Randomize your path. Don't give the enemy a clean solution. Another group focused on the vertical. Johnson didn't fight flat unless he had to. He climbed and dove, used altitude like money in the bank, spent it, earned it back. In a horizontal turning fight, numbers eventually win. In a vertical fight, energy wins. And energy could be managed. One skilled pilot could survive against many if he controlled the third dimension and refused to get slow. By summer, those lessons were taught as principles. Unpredictability, energy management, calculated aggression. By June 1944, the Mustang's reputation had flipped completely. It was no longer the mocked coffin with wings. It was the premier American fighter in Europe. Pilots requested transfer into Mustang groups. They wanted the range. They wanted the speed. They wanted the ability to take the war to the deepest targets and come back. Now it was the P-47 pilots who grumbled. They wanted Mustangs too. Johnson became a training officer, briefing new pilots with the same plain voice he used on the radio. He showed them the film, walked them through the sequence, explained his thought process. And he didn't sell himself as flawless. He pointed out his mistakes, moments he misjudged deflection, moments he let the aircraft get slow, moments he gave away angles he shouldn't have. The rookies listened like their lives depended on it. Because they did. They asked him the questions everyone wanted answered. How did you stay calm? How did you track 14 fighters at once? How did you know when to fight and when to extend? Johnson's answers were brutally practical. You don't track 14, he told them. You track one, the one you're shooting. When he's gone, you find the next. Don't carry the whole problem in your head. Solve the one in front of you. Then solve the next. And the calm? He didn't claim it. You're not calm, he said. You're terrified. But you fly anyway. The fear doesn't stop you. It sharpens you. Keeps you awake. Keeps you alive. Those briefings were recorded, transcribed, distributed. His words traveled farther than he ever did. Even squadrons in the Pacific received copies and adapted the principles to a different enemy. Because the principles weren't European. They were universal. The Luftwaffe noticed. German pilots began reporting a shift. Escorts more aggressive. Fighters that didn't simply disengage. Pilots who pressed attacks even when outnumbered. Those reports filtered upward. Luftwaffe commanders adjusted, telling their pilots to avoid prolonged engagements with Mustangs. Strike the bombers. Ignore the escorts if possible. Disengage quickly. But ignoring the escorts became harder. Because the Mustangs stopped wandering off chasing every decoy. They stayed closer to the heavies. They protected the bombers as a mission, not as an idea. And when the Luftwaffe attacked, the Mustangs turned into them and forced them to fight. Broke up their passes. Spoiled their angles. Disrupted their timing. The bombers survived more often. The missions continued. The strategic effect became enormous. A campaign that had nearly collapsed in late 1943 became sustainable. Loss rates became survivable. Crews began to complete tours. Morale lifted. Factories burned. Oil refineries burned. Rail yards burned. The war machine began to starve. One pilot's 3 minutes did not win the air war. But it changed how the air war was fought. Johnson flew 73 more missions. He shot down 6 more German aircraft. He received the Distinguished Service Cross, then the Silver Star, then the Distinguished Flying Cross with clusters. And he didn't talk much about any of it. Years later, someone asked him about the mission, the one with 14 Germans. Why did he do it? Johnson's answer stayed simple. There were 10 men in that bomber, he said. They had families. They wanted to go home. I could help. The interviewer pressed him. But it was suicide. The odds were impossible. Johnson shrugged, as if the question missed the point completely. The odds didn't matter, he said. The men mattered. That was the only explanation he ever gave. And the ripple traveled beyond tactics, beyond doctrine, beyond psychology. By summer 1944, the P-51 was in full production. North American factories ran around the clock. Mustangs rolled off the line in numbers the Army Air Forces could barely absorb. Fighter groups converted, then more converted, then nearly all. The numbers told the story better than any speech. In the first quarter of 1944, Mustang units achieved kill ratios around 5-1. By the second quarter, the ratio climbed 8-1. The Luftwaffe was still there. But the balance of the sky was changing. And it had started, quietly, violently, when a young pilot with 9 days of combat time looked at a dying bomber, ignored the math, and dove anyway. By the spring of 1944, the Luftwaffe is bleeding itself dry. Not just aircraft, experience. Every week, More veteran German pilots vanish from the sky faster than their training schools can replace them. The men who survived Poland, France, Britain, Russia, men who learned the hard lessons and lived, are being consumed in the grinder of 1944. Meanwhile, the Americans are doing the opposite. They are learning, adapting, stacking experience mission by mission. And now they finally have a machine that lets them do what the Luftwaffe once did to others. Take the war to the enemy's airfields. Because the Mustang's range doesn't just escort bombers. It unlocks a new kind of mission. Hunting. P-51 groups begin flying fighter sweeps deep into Germany, sometimes not escorting anything at all. They roam ahead of the bomber streams, searching for Luftwaffe airfields, waiting for the most vulnerable moment in a fighter pilot's life. Takeoff. Landing. Low speed. Flaps down. Gear out. Nowhere to run. Mustangs drop in fast and low, strafing runways, ripping into parked aircraft, igniting fuel trucks, burning depots, shredding anything that can fly before it ever reaches altitude. The Luftwaffe cannot hide. In May 1944, one Mustang group destroys an entire day's worth of German air power, dozens of aircraft in a single sweep, some in the air, many more on the ground, because the Mustangs can do something no other Allied fighter can do. They can fly to the far edge of the Reich and come back. German commanders finally understand the shape of the problem. The Americans can strike anywhere, anytime. The skies over Germany are no longer a sanctuary. And when a pilot no longer believes he can survive, the war changes. Not all at once, but you see it in the small cracks. More missed sorties, more maintenance problems, more sudden illnesses, more men who simply stop showing up. The will to fight begins to erode. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, the result is visible from the ground. Thousands of Allied transports and bombers cross the channel in broad daylight, wave after wave, and the Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, can barely respond. A few scattered sorties, a handful of interceptions. Ineffective, disorganized, too late, because the Mustangs are everywhere, patrolling, hunting, waiting. German pilots see them and turn back. Land, refuse to take off again. Years later, Allied leaders will say the quiet truth. Air superiority made the invasion possible. Without it, landing craft would have been slaughtered on the beaches. Supply lines would have been cut. The breakout would have failed. Air superiority wasn't guaranteed by numbers alone. It was guaranteed by reach, the ability to strike deep, destroy the enemy's fighters before they could threaten the invasion. The P-51 provided that reach. And the Mustang's impact does not stop in Europe. The same problem exists across the world, over the Pacific. By 1944 to 1945, B-29 superfortresses are bombing Japan from bases in the Mariana Islands, flights so long and extreme that escort is nearly impossible. The B-29s go alone. Japanese fighters intercept. Losses mount. Then the map changes. Iwo Jima becomes an American airfield, close enough to Tokyo to matter. From there, Mustangs with drop tanks can escort bombers to the Japanese mainland, fight off interceptors, and come back. The first escort missions launch in 1945, and the pattern mirrors Europe. Skilled defenders, outnumbered, overmatched by an escort that refuses to leave. The bombers complete their runs. Incendiaries fall. Cities burn. By August, the air campaign over Japan becomes total. American aircraft fly wherever they want. The Japanese Air Force is shattered. When the atomic missions fly, the bomber crews do not need an escort. The skies are empty, and the war ends. The Mustang's production continues into 1946. Then it stops. Jets are coming. The future belongs to turbines and swept wings. The piston engine fighter, for all its beauty and brutality, is becoming obsolete. But the P-51 refuses to vanish. It serves again in Korea, not as an air superiority fighter. MiG-15s are too fast, but as a ground attack machine. Tough, accurate, reliable, present where soldiers need help. Then it serves in smaller conflicts. Border patrol, counterinsurgency, second-line duties where its simplicity and endurance matter. Some nations fly Mustangs into the 1980s, half a century after its first flight. Very few aircraft achieve that kind of longevity. And after war, the Mustang finds another life. Air racing. Its speed and efficiency make it the perfect foundation for men who want to push the limits. Racers modify them, clip wings, boost engines, chase records. At Reno, Mustangs scream past pylons at impossible speeds, hundreds of miles per hour, only feet above the ground. Crowds watching in stunned silence as history becomes a blur of aluminum and sound. Collectors restore them for air shows. And when a Merlin engine opens up at full throttle, it does something no museum display can do. It makes the past physical, a deep rolling thunder that you feel in your bones. Children stare with mouths open. Veterans sometimes cry without meaning to, because that sound means something. Not war. Survival. Johnson's specific aircraft, the Mustang he flew on March 6, 1944, doesn't survive the post-war years. It is scrapped, cut apart, melted down, recycled into something anonymous. No plaque, no museum display, just gone. But the footage remains. The gun camera film is digitized, archived, studied. It appears in documentaries and training films and online compilations watched by millions of people who never learned the pilot's name. But they see what he did. They see the proof. One pilot alone can change everything. Not through recklessness, not through luck, through skill, through courage, through the decision to act when most people would not. The P-51 gave him the tools, but Johnson made the choice. And that choice rippled outward, through tactics, through doctrine, through the war, through history. The tools change. Pistons become turbines. Guns become missiles. Speed becomes stealth. But the principles remain. Aggression, energy, unpredictability, courage. They are timeless. They are universal. They are the difference between defeat and victory, between death and survival, between forgetting and remembering. Robert Johnson's minutes over Germany are not forgotten. They live in every fighter pilot who learns to turn into the threat instead of away. In every manual that teaches initiative over caution. In every briefing where someone says the simplest truth of combat. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is flying anyway. Robert Johnson returns home in the fall of 1945. The war is over. Europe rebuilds. The Pacific falls silent. Millions of men trade uniforms for civilian clothes, medals for toolboxes, war for ordinary life. Johnson goes back to Iowa. The farm is still there. His parents are older, grayer, relieved. They don't ask many questions. He doesn't offer many answers. There is work to do, fences to mend, engines to fix, a tractor that still breaks down too often. He slips back into the rhythm. Early mornings, long days, the smell of soil and diesel and growing things. It is quiet, simple, the opposite of war. When people ask, he gives short answers. Yes, he flew fighters. Yes, he saw combat. No, he doesn't want to talk about it. A local newspaper prints a respectful story. Hometown hero, Distinguished Service Cross, kills confirmed. Johnson reads it once and never mentions it again. He marries in 1947, a schoolteacher from the next county, quiet like him. They raise children. He works as a mechanic, then becomes a flight instructor at a local strip, teaching crop dusters and weekend pilots. The pay is modest. The hours are long. He doesn't mind. Years pass. Korea happens. Vietnam happens. Johnson watches the news and says little. When veterans groups invite him to speak, he declines. When historians request interviews, he offers brief answers, factual, unemotional. He does not see himself as special. He did his job. Others did more. Many did not come home. Decades later, researchers contact him about the March 6th mission. They have the footage. They want to confirm details. Johnson corrects small errors, altitudes, timings, numbers. Those things matter. And then comes the question everyone asks. Why did you attack? Johnson's answer doesn't change. The bomber needed help. They press him. But you were alone. Outnumbered. Low on fuel. Johnson pauses, then admits the truth he rarely says out loud. He was scared, more scared than he had ever been. His hands shook so hard, he could barely hold the stick. But the fear didn't matter. The men in that bomber mattered. Would he do it again? He thinks for a moment, then says yes. Exactly the same. Late in life, he stands in a hangar beside a restored Mustang, silver and flawless, Merlin running. The same thunder he remembers. Someone hands him a microphone. He speaks for less than a minute. He thanks the people who restored it. Thanks the people who remember. He says the Mustang was a good plane. It saved his life. It saved a lot of lives. That is all. Afterward, young pilots approach him with tactical questions: energy management, vertical fighting, tracking threats. These questions make sense to him. Mechanics, physics, logic. Then a younger pilot asks the one question that has no technical answer. How did you find the courage? Johnson looks at him for a long moment, then tells him the truth. You don't find courage, he says. Courage is what you do when you're terrified. When every instinct says run, when the math says you'll die, you act anyway. Not because you're brave, because someone needs help, and you're there. Robert Johnson dies an old man, surrounded by family, quiet to the end. His obituary is brief. Veteran, mechanic, father, grandfather. It mentions the Distinguished Service Cross, but does not explain why. At his funeral, aircraft fly overhead in missing man formation. One peels up and away, climbing into the sun until it vanishes. His family donates his medals, his logbook, his flight suit. They sit behind glass beside a photograph. Johnson, 22 years old, standing next to a Mustang, smiling, alive. People stop, read the plaque, learn the story. Some linger, some move on. But the story remains. Because the lesson remains. When you see someone who needs help, you help. Even if the odds are impossible. Even if you are alone. Even if you are scared. That is what courage is. Not the absence of fear. The defiance of it. Robert Johnson defied fear for a few minutes over Germany. He saved 10 men. He changed how fighters fought. He proved what an aircraft could do. And the echo still travels. Through manuals, through training, through every pilot who turns into the threat instead of away. The Mustang was a machine. Aluminum, steel, and a brilliant engine. Machines don't win wars. People do. People like Robert Johnson.